Hold on a second.
Hi, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And today I'm coming to you not live, but as a recorded show due to technical difficulties. But I'm continuing on in my Shroud Wars podcast. And today we have another special guest joining us, Guy Powell. Hey, Guy, how's it going?
Hey, Dale, great to be here.
Awesome. It took about 40 minutes or so, but we finally made it. So yeah, Guy is basically here. He's written a new book on the Shroud of Turin, and we're going to be kind of interviewing him and getting to know him about this new book that he's going to be publishing. But just before we get into that, my co-host Teddy Pappas is back. Hey, Teddy, how's it going?
Hi, going well. Thanks.
Welcome back. All right, cool. So Guy, I just want to turn it to you. This is your first time being on the show. I think I was on your show once before. Just for anyone in my audience who's not familiar with you, do you kind of want to introduce us as to who you are, a bit about your background, and how your faith journey and how you got involved with the Shroud in general?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I got involved with the Shroud probably. I haven't figured it out yet, but it's either about 15 or 20 years ago. My brother, he's a Shroud authenticist or a Shroud believer, I guess. And he sent me this book, Ian Wilson, The Blood in the Shroud. And I read that book, and I don't know, I guess I'm just weird. But one of the things that's interesting is that it has all of the dates and all of the history that he at least researched. And so it would say, in 595, this happened, and in 596, this happened, and in June of this happened. And he had a whole bunch of different dates and proof and evidence of what was happening. And then he had a handful of theories in there. And I read through that. And I said, man, this would be great if it were kind of relatable to somebody that could actually read it from front to back without having to try and read like dates of history. And so that was, first of all, my early interest in the Shroud in a larger way. And then I said, but I ought to write a book on this, except it needs to be a historical fiction where somebody could read it with a kind of a storyline and be entertained with it, but also then understand what the background of the Shroud was and how things would progress over time. And so, as a matter of fact, then, like that weekend, I wrote basically the first half of the first chapter, and then it sat there for 15 or 20 years as I wrote other books in marketing primarily. But as I wrote other books, and then finally COVID hit, and I said, I am now going to sit down and I'm going to actually put pen to paper. And so I was sitting here and I started doing that, and I did that, and it took me about a year. I hired a historian, researcher to help me do a lot of research on mainly what was life like, in ancient times and then medieval times and things like that. And then adding that in because the story has to be about somebody actually living in those times. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then that's kind of the genesis of the book that I wrote that's very, very close to being published. So really excited about that as well.
Awesome. And out of curiosity, before your brother got you into the dates of the Shroud, were you always a Christian, or did you ever go through? Yeah, what was your general faith journey?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, so definitely grew up in a Christian household. We went to church every Sunday, unless my dad would sneak us off to play golf on Sundays, but mostly we went to church. And then I hate to say it, I became I can't remember what the term is, but a regular churchgoer was Christmas and Easter, twice a year during college. So I kind of fell away, but would come home for Christmas and we'd go to, Christmas service and then Easter service. So, and there's kind of a joking term about that. And that's really what I did during college and probably for a handful of years after that. And then I met my wife. She then got me back into going to church, and then getting our son to go to church. And we then, basically said, hey, we're going to church every Sunday, whether you like it or not, to our son. And I don't know if you've probably brought kids to church, and sometimes they don't want to go. And so we definitely had to, set the law down, so to speak, and have been going ever since. I am now very active at a church called St. James United Methodist. And as a matter of fact, I just taught a 3-week series on what I call the walk through the Passion. So starting with, some people think that the Passion starts on Palm Sunday. Some say it's the Last Supper. Whatever it is, I started on the Last Supper and then went through, the Last Supper, the trial, and then what have you, through the crucifixion, and then of course the resurrection, and then a couple of post-resurrection stories. So it was really, really a lot of fun to put that together. And then of course I had the unveiling, so to speak, of the shroud. Post-resurrection, I have John and Peter running up to the tomb after Mary Magdalene told them about it, and I have them running up to the tomb, and then I have the shroud, the empty shroud, in the tomb on the table, and then that's when I kind of showed that. It was kind of fascinating.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one thing you mentioned a little bit about your book. That was where I wanted to go next, is to kind of give you a chance just to, what is this focus on your new book? You kind of hinted that for you, it's a historical fiction. That's something I haven't seen before in, pro shroud circles. So do you want to kind of explain a little bit about your book and what the purpose is there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, twofold. One is all of the other books about the shroud are trying to prove one way or another something about the shroud. So they're more, I wouldn't call them scientific papers necessarily, although there's certainly scientists and very good researchers writing the book and writing their books and saying, well, here is then how the shroud relates to the Sudarium. Here is how the science of the shroud is somehow valid, or here is then the story of the pollen on the shroud, or Marquardt's book, which I've been working through here on another paper I'm putting together. And here is then the history of the shroud, and it's a very factual book. And as opposed to a historical fiction, now a historical fiction is basically trying to take as many facts as possible, but to put a fictional story together around it. And one of the challenges is that the fictional story has to take place over 2,000 years. And so I picked out 13 different stories and different points in that 2,000 years, and then wrote a story around it. So I have Mario Trematore, beating his way through the glass to try and save the shroud from the fire. I have the Poor Clare's sisters sewing the patches onto the shroud, and wrote a story about that. I have the Persians or the Sassanids attacking Edessa in eastern Turkey, sadly orphaned now today. I have a little boy, a 13-year-old boy, going out and actually purchasing the shroud cloth. And he's given money from Joseph of Arimathea through Nicodemus to go out and buy a cloth. And he doesn't know what it's for. And so then there's a story around that, and then how it gets from Weaver somewhere over to Golgotha, where the cloth is eventually needed. And so there's 13 of those stories, and each of those stories then are taking as many of the facts that are available, and a lot of the logic that comes out of, well, if these are the facts, then this is kind of probably what happened afterward. How did they get Jesus down from the cross? How did they carry him from Golgotha over to the tomb, and how did they do whatever it was that they did?
Well, it's basically like with a movie. It's not, if it's a movie about somebody or some event, you've got people speaking, there's dialogue, yet it's, a figment of the writer's imagination, but you kind of have an idea as to what people might be saying, and it helps, I think, paint a picture for people to just to bring a somewhat of a realism to just details, like historical details, like movies about the Vietnam War.
Right.
There's
right.
a lot of artistic license in terms of what the writers write, but there's probably a lot of truth. I mean, people probably were saying those things, doing those things. I really think it's fantastic to do a fiction where it just fills in the gaps and it just makes the story a lot more relatable. So
Yeah.
kudos on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and absolutely. So one of the things, and so this guy that I had, historian that I had that was helping me to do a lot of the research on what was life in ancient times and then later in medieval times. And one of the things that was fascinating was how do you drink water in ancient times? Water, if you look at even many of the emperors, they died of dysentery. So dysentery was a disease that was just rampant. And the problem then is that how do I get water that's drinkable? Because you have to drink. And so how do you get water that's drinkable? Well, what they did was they mixed it with wine and with vinegar. So if you think about Jesus on the cross, and he gets handed up a sponge with vinegar on it, with myrrh or something like that in it. Well, basically, he's just being given water that's then mixed with vinegar because he has to drink something. And I mean, and everybody around there also has to drink something. I mean, you have to drink
can't just
water.
be drinking nothing but wine.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I
but
guess
on
some
the,
people could.
Okay.
well, but on the other hand, actually, that's what everybody did, including kids. Everybody is drunk. And
They're all
especially the
stoned.
Roman soldiers, they're all drunk because they have to drink something, and you can't drink the water. So you have to drink, the water with wine or the water with
safe,
vinegar.
I guess. Of course, they could have made it into just like grape juice as opposed to wine. So I guess there's that too.
Well, but then there's definitely a cost issue, and but the fermentation process certainly, gets the germs out, and so then that's kind of what you're trying to do. So I thought that was really fascinating, and then so I actually made so the drink that you drink, it's called Posca, Posca, and Posca is a mix of water either with vinegar or wine, and then if you want it sweet, you'd put honey in it. If you wanted it sour, you wouldn't put any honey in, and then you could add different spices to it. So you might add cardamom, or you might add some other spice to flavor it up, and that would be your drink, and that would be how you would get your water, and it would be then disinfected.
They never thought of boiling it, I guess, or they probably didn't know about boiling.
Well, they may have known about it, but you have to realize that that everything has a cost to it. And so, what is the easiest, cheapest way to do things? And so, yes, you're probably right. They probably knew that boiling it would do that, but there's a cost to actually building a fire. And and if you're in the desert, or if you're in a sparsely wooded area, then where are you going to get the food, the fuel for the fire? Now, of course, there's dung and stuff like that, and a lot of the fires were built with dung. So you would have an oven, one of those humped ovens, and that's where you would make the bread for the Seder meal or what have you. But the fire that would actually be in there would be either dung or a mix of dung and some kind of a hay or wood.
Awesome. Well, oh, no problem. I just want to kind of, so you guys are absolutely right. That is an interesting take. I never considered that aspect. I thought it was kind of meant to be like an insult to Jesus kind of thing. But no, that is the way the water was in order for it to be safe to drink and stuff. But going back to your book, Teddy kind of mentioned in terms of the objective, by writing a historical fiction, there are certain objectives that are accomplished, but obviously you're the author. I want to turn it to you. Like, what would you say the objective is? What do you hope readers get out of this?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And the objective is actually very, very simple. I just want to convert one person. That's all I want to do. If I can convert one person through my book, then I will have succeeded. And as you know, it is incredibly hard to convert somebody. It is really hard. And so if I'm able to get a book out there that a non-Christian could read and learn about Christ and learn about the message, and hopefully then to take that message and say, yeah, I want to learn more. and hopefully eventually I want to learn enough more that I want to also join the Christian church. And so that's my primary objective, is to convert just one. If I obviously I'd love to convert millions, but if I can convert just one, then I will have met my objective.
Awesome. All right. Well, let me ask then, because you just said, look, you want to get this message across. So in the first place, what is the message of your book as a whole? What?
Yeah, and I end the book with one of Jesus's sayings to doubting Thomas, and blessed are those who do not see and yet believe. So the shroud itself is at least I believe it's authentic, or is a 99% chance of being authentic, and yet, you know, I believed prior to getting involved in the church. I believed without having seen the shroud. I believed without having seen Jesus, resurrected Jesus. I believed without all this stuff. And so, you know, blessed are those that have not seen yet believe. And so at the end, even though I've done this whole story of showing potentially how the shroud could have gotten from Golgotha in 33 AD to Turin in 2023 AD, nevertheless, it's really, you know, how do people believe without having seen Jesus, or without even seeing the shroud? I didn't need the shroud to believe, and I don't know if you have, but you know, but I imagine that just about every Christian has not seen the shroud, and yet they believe. They have definitely, or most likely, haven't seen Jesus, although, you know, he has potentially done some appearances. But you know, generally they have not seen and yet they believe, and so that's really the message that I have in the book.
Awesome. Yeah, Teddy, did you have any follow-up questions related to the message that Guy's trying to get across?
Yeah, actually, the situation with doubting Thomas is that particular passage that you bring up. I have found that in speaking to certain types of Christians, where they have a great hostility towards the shroud, and sometimes they'll, for example, think, oh, well, it can't be legitimate because here it says, you know, the Bible strips, and that's, you know, that makes it mean that it should be like a mummy, strips of cloth, but that's not what we see on the shroud. But then when you know, try to show them that that's not an accurate interpretation, or that there can be more definitions of that particular word, they're still very hostile towards it. And I mean, they'll never come out, well, maybe not never, but usually they won't come out and say this. But I definitely get the feeling that it has something to do with, oh, no, we don't want to accept the shroud as being evidence of God's existence, evidence of the supernatural, evidence, scientific evidence of a miracle, because then we are accepting evidence for our belief in God. And then that doesn't make us, you know, quite as good in God's eyes, in that we are not just blindly believing in God and having just nothing but faith. And I think that there are certain people that think that it cheapens their faith or their belief in God to acknowledge what the Holy Shroud is. And the thing is, and they'll rely upon that passage from Thomas. But the thing is that I forgot, Dale, what's the passage where it talks about giving proof for your belief?
Well, there's multiple, but 1 Peter 3:15 is the major, like, apologetics text.
In terms of giving a defense for the faith and why you have this belief. And so I don't think we need to hide from showing evidence for God's existence, and that it's more than just belief, because, you know, anybody can then just say, well, had you been brought up in a Muslim household, then you'd probably be a Muslim. And so to just, I mean, because there's a strong correlation between the faith that you're brought up into and what faith you have as an adult. A very strong, I mean, it's not perfect, but it has a lot to do with it. And so, but if you get into evidence, then that can help.
Let me kind of piggyback off you, Teddy, what you're saying. Like, Guy, I think what Teddy's saying, and it's something I've encountered in my own church here, is where there's almost like this, people are opposed to evidence, that it's better if you just have pure blind faith. There's that kind of attitude. Do you think the way you've approached the evidence for the Shroud through your format, do you think that might speak better to people who think this way, or?
Man, well, I don't know. I haven't really been asked that question before. That's a good one. But I do believe, what is your, in a scientific world that we kind of live in, where you have evidence, for everything that happens, people are kind of expecting evidence. When they go to court, they want to see DNA and a video of what happened. And yet in the Christian faith, for that group of people potentially, where they say, no, I have my faith, I have my blind faith, and I believe the word that I read in the Bible. Well, that's evidence right there. The 4 Gospels are the written evidence that Jesus was here on earth, and that he lived among us, and then he was crucified, and then dead, and then he was risen. So that in essence is kind of the proof. It's not DNA proof. It's just, somebody's writing the proof. So there is, even for them, there's proof, evidence that, that Jesus existed.
What's interesting is, like, when thinking about the concept of blind faith, if what your faith is based on is blind, I think that it's easily attackable, and people are more likely to shift from it if they hear some better argument, if there aren't deep roots to their faith. That's why I think sometimes, I mean, you hear statistics about how so many kids, when they get to college, it's like, they may have been brought up in a religious Christian household, but as soon as they just kind of accept the Christian beliefs based on what they were brought up in, and they just didn't even think more deeply about them. And I think most kids are that way. But then as soon as they go off to college, and some atheists and agnostics start challenging them, they don't have the wherewithal, the intellectual wherewithal to counter these attacks to Christianity. And then, the beliefs that they had that were based on nothing but, well, my mama told me this, it easily falls by the wayside. And so I love that the Shroud gives, to me, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that God is real, and that the supernatural realm exists. And even though I believed in God before I learned about the Shroud, when I was 15 years old and read a book on it, it has strengthened my confidence. Whereas at first, I had confidence that God was real. But, there are different levels of confidence. Confidence can be a spectrum.
Well, I think
and what it was back then and what it is now. I mean, now I don't think of it as faith in God. I feel like with the Shroud, we have knowledge of God, which is, to me, so much more powerful. But God gave us this gift, so it's like I don't think it's something wrong to believe in, because it's Him. It's got His imprimatur on it, His face.
Well, I agree, kind of thing, with your point, Teddy. And I think that's one thing that's good about Guy's book is, in a way, even for people that think this way, because they think they're just reading a historical fiction story, but they're getting evidence along with that. And that's where I kind of wanted to turn it to you, Guy. And I wanted to ask, like, obviously, what you mentioned, there are these 13 narratives that you focus on. So, like, what are some of the things that you learned when you were writing this book from a historical standpoint then?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, well, the first one was the drink, the Pascha drink, which is water and wine or water and vinegar. And that was one. And that was a big one. And back in those ancient times, and probably even much further, was that everybody is really just they're just drunk. But the other they're just drunk. And but I think the other thing that I learned was all of the if the shroud moved from Jerusalem up to either Syria or Edessa, then Edessa to Constantinople, Constantinople to Athens, and what have you, all of the different things that were going on that would influence or cause that movement to take place. So in the 600s, you have the Sassanid Empire. And I'd kind of heard of it, but I never really knew it. And so I had to, look through it and understand it. And it was them that were invading over to the Roman Empire. And so then as they invaded, then that caused movement of certain things. And then if you had the shroud, the most valuable relic, then you wanted to protect it from the invaders, because you certainly wouldn't want them to steal it or just to hold on to it or destroy it or whatever. So you'd have to move it. The second thing you have is the Muslims coming over as well. So the Persians came over first, and then the Muslims conquered the Persians, and then they came over. They started attacking the Roman Empire, and then I got into the Roman Empire, and I never realized, I never knew. This is just I never knew that the Roman Empire was not based in Rome after the 300s.
Yeah.
The Roman Empire, the capital of Rome, was moved over to Istanbul, modern day Istanbul, Constantinople, and yet it was still called the Roman Empire. And as a matter of fact, Rome was conquered by one of the enemies to the Roman Empire. And these are the Goths, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. They actually conquered Rome.
Yeah.
And and they owned Rome for 100, 150 years in the 500s or so. And so all of those different historical things, and just putting them all together, I just found that so almost exciting. It was just fascinating to see what happened.
Yeah.
Then
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. And then I think nowadays, and this is maybe part of the book, but also just part of the growing knowledge base that I have, is that pride is definitely the greatest sin of all, right? And now, if you are associated with the shroud, you have a certain level of celebrity, and that would be called the sin of pride. Is I want to be associated with the shroud, so that I can be thought of as being, being a celebrity, because I can touch the shroud and I've been there. And you can definitely see that with certain factions that are all trying to vie for getting, access to the shroud to do whatever they want to do. And for example, the greatest thing which just happened in 2002 was the restoration of the shroud, and that I saw as being that underlying pride that went into, hey, I'm a celebrity because I got to touch it and restore it and whatever. And so I do see a lot of that going on, and that's definitely something that you can kind of see even today when people want to be next to famous people. Well, they want to be next to this famous icon. So I guess that's maybe another thing that I've kind of picked up along the way as well.
That's interesting. So like your study, you're picking up on all these just general history, and I find that fascinating too. I'm a huge fan of Roman history, classical and late antiquity and stuff. So yeah, I think that's great. Like even if the shroud turns out to be a bust, worst case scenario, you're still learning good history, so it's still worth it to study it, right?
Yep.
Well, and one of the things we were talking about in terms of pride, in terms of being associated with the shroud, I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, and I'd like to mention that in that, there are many people who do not believe that the shroud is legit, and people who say that, oh, that's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo and pseudoscience, and the shroud's a fake, and look, the radiocarbon dating proves that it's medieval, and this and that, and they try to paint authenticists as being kooks or science deniers and things like that. And so in some ways, I think that when we pick up the baton and continue to run with it in terms of telling the world and teaching the world about the evidence that shows that the shroud is authentic, there are some people that are going to say nice things about us about doing that, but then there are also, I think, a bunch of people that are going to say not so nice things about us, and so it cuts both ways. But ultimately, the greatest thing I believe that we can do when with the time that we have on this earth is to just figure out what the truth is, and then to proclaim it from the mountaintops. And it's regardless of whether we get criticized or praised or whatever. It's just, do the right thing.
Well, I think so. Again, piggyback. I think what Teddy's kind of asking you guys, did you find it? So you found that element interesting to learn about the celebrity of Shroud scholars, but have you also been surprised by the animus against Shroud scholars in any way, or?
Yeah. Wow. and I mean, wow is, if you're on any of these groups and then the barbs that are just going back and forth, and instead of and some of it I think is a language issue. I deal with a lot of folks that are multilingual and where English is not their primary language, and so then it's a little bit more difficult to express your opinion without putting maybe unwarranted or undue, or even they didn't even know they were putting like that emotion into it. But then there's others that just seem to just tear people down, and without trying to add to the value, because to Teddy's point about growing the truth and building up this wealth of knowledge and being able to then leverage what's been done out there to get to the next level, whatever that next level is. And I think that's unfortunate, because there is a lot of tearing down that takes place, as opposed to the building up of, and trying to just in a civil way add to the overall knowledge of what actually happened to the shroud, what's on it, what's not on it, how was that image made, when did it take place, is it true, and things like that. And I think that's that's unfortunate.
Because
and I don't know if that's,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and I don't know if that's a pride thing. I think there is a little bit of pride in there as well, is that I can prove that you are wrong.
For all humans and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's. So you've kind of given us an insight into what you've learned historically during your research and just in general and stuff. Kind of narrowing the focus down to the shroud in particular. Was there anything surprising or new that you learned during the writing of your book on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think there's two pieces to knowledge of the shroud. The first part is the history, starting from the post-resurrection and how it got to where it is today in Turin, and then as different pieces of knowledge kind of come together in different reports and what have you, or different papers that are written, or different archives that you find stuff in, and I think one of the biggest things that I learned is that history is not accurate. As much as we'd like to say, hey, I've got this piece of paper on it and it says the shroud existed in 495 and blah blah blah, and here's the wording of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. And so that you find a paper and you kind of have to find other papers to kind of corroborate what's on that paper. And so history, especially the further you get back in time, is less and less accurate. Now, and it's the same thing, even with us. What did you have for dinner last night? And you have to think about it, right? And okay, what did you have last week? What did you have a month ago? What
Especially if
did you
you're
have
over 45. You really
That's right. That's right. So, so I think history is unfortunately relatively inaccurate, but what you have is kind of the preponderance of the evidence. To be able to say, well, I've got this piece and that piece and this piece and that piece, and they all kind of point to the shroud being from, the first century.
One of the things. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Yeah. So that I think was probably the biggest aha for me as well in writing the book, was realizing as you're learning about history, that history is maybe not 100% accurate. And yes, and I was doing this thing, the walk through the Passion, and you look even at the Gospels, you look at the four Gospels talking about Mary Magdalene going to the tomb, and each one of them has a slightly different story. Were there one angel? Were there two? Did Jesus appear then, or did he not? Was Mary alone, or did she go with the other Mary? Was Mary with just the other Mary, or with Joanna? Was she with just Joanna, or with Salome? Were there others involved? And you look at those four stories, and they're all absolutely different. And yet, if I was in court, I would probably believe the group of that, because if they had exactly the same story, then you would say, well, that sounds like corroboration, collaboration. And so that just doesn't make sense either. So them being slightly different is also a kind of a proof that, yes, the history is pretty close. It's pretty darn close to being the truth of what actually happened.
Police detectives are very, very, you constantly see, if you get several witnesses to an event, none of the descriptions are going to be exactly the same. It's just, people have different vantage points. People seek to highlight certain things that other people don't. So that's just happens.
I had a follow-up question. If you have a question, go ahead and ask it, Teddy.
Oh, can I just mention one more thing? One of the interesting things to me about the Shroud is you were talking, Guy, about how just because you see, one piece of evidence in history, it might or it might not be accurate. Just like if you see one piece of evidence in modern day, in our lives, well, the person might be wrong or correct about what they're writing. But what's so beautiful about the Shroud is that there's so much information on it that is corroborated by multiple different pieces of evidence, and even in terms of just different types of evidence, and so it echoes the Gospels, but it also echoes the things that Josephus and Tacitus and all of these other secular historians say. I mean, there's no question among the rational that Jesus existed as a historical figure. And I mean, you basically have the main points that the Gospels are saying through secular historians, minus the resurrection part. But even with that, there are hints about, these people, how the Christians just, at the time of Christ being on the cross, everybody except for some of the women and John stayed with him. Everybody fled. But then something happened, the resurrection, which then gave them this bold confidence to stand up for what they knew to be true and to risk life and limb in order to continue to do that. Because if you realize that what Jesus said was true, then you've got more to worry about than what's going to happen to you on this earth. You've got to worry about the next life, which is eternal. And so, you're inspired and motivated to do the right thing. But that's one of the beautiful things about the Shroud, and from just multidisciplinary areas, the evidence corroborates that. So just like what you said, you don't have to just rely on one little piece of evidence where somebody might poke a hole in that. But when you see a bunch of evidence coming from different directions, and the shroud is echoing it, it gives us greater cause to believe, just even from history, that it's authentic. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. And I absolutely. And so I followed Ian Wilson almost to the letter, as close as I could when writing the book, and then these 13 stories I mentioned. And then now I've been spending time with Jack Marquardt and reading his history, so to speak. And it's going a totally different path. And then Tristan Casabianca's got a slightly different path. And so you have then, multiple paths on how things got there. So there, okay, I followed the one, and who knows whether it's true or not. Well, I guess at some point maybe,
Well, that's what I kind of wanted to ask you a follow-up in your book. Did you, like, obviously historians, you probably would have learned they can apply these criteria of authenticity, right? Multiple independent sources, or the criterion of embarrassment, stuff like this. In any of your stories, did you employ any kind of investigation at all when people were doing that, or I'm just sort of interested.
Yeah, no, I read as much as I could, but there's only so much time in the day, and since I wrote it, it's been more or less done probably for about 18 months. It's now in the publishing process. And since that 18 months, now I have time to uncover even more stuff. And I'm going, oh, I wish I'd have known that. And oh, I wish I'd have known that. And so, but the nice thing is it's a historical fiction. And it puts together a possible, I think it's plausible. There's no question that even if you were a scientist and a historian and you said, this is the fact, there is doubt on everything. And so there's no question that there's some things in there that I got wrong. And, or that, even knowledge today that I might have is that, I probably should have written it this way versus that way. And, but no question that that's the case. But the idea is not necessarily to get everything right, because you'll never get it right, never ever. But at least
you're
you have
trying
something
to bring it to life for people.
Well, that's exactly right. My goal is to convert the non-converted, and if I can get a message out that gets them to start to think about the shroud and then Christianity and what it means to to be a Christian, then I think I will have succeeded.
Guy, one of the things that is so heartwarming about the shroud is to be able to look at the holy face and to have a very good idea as to what Jesus looked like and looks like, and in his incarnate form. And it brings you closer. I know at least it does with me when I've got that beautiful face to look at. And it just draws me in. And I think what's really lovely about what you've done with your book is that you've taken a bunch of cold hard facts and history and knowledge about history, and you've woven it together in a way that brings it home to people, to where they start envisioning themselves in that time period. I remember as a kid, there was it was a book, and it was a long series. It was like 6 books to tell the story. And at the end, one of the leading characters dies. And it almost felt like somebody that I knew died, because I was learning about their lives, seeing their lives progress through time. And you get emotionally involved, even though it's fiction. But with the shroud, I mean, we know that there's more to it than just somebody making stuff up. There's the Gospels and the historicity of the gospel. But I like that what you've done with your book is you've created something that helps bring the story to people to where they can kind of go through it with you, through the characters, and it becomes more real. And I think you bond to the information a lot better on an emotional level with that. So
Yeah,
I think
and that
that's
is
really
definitely,
spectacular.
yeah, and that is definitely what I try to do anyway.
Mhm.
And I think, well, hopefully we'll see here as soon as it's out in the next handful of weeks, and we'll start to get some, real reviews. All of my beta readers and other folks that have read part of it and all of it, they definitely enjoyed it and found it entertaining, and hopefully a way for them to see, what's out there. And certainly the Shroud is one, or knowledge of the Shroud is one way to learn more about Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
Now, one
There's
thing I wanted to ask you about is one of your 13 narratives. Do you talk about Stirp at all? Is that a story in your book at all, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the latest ones. That one is one of the interesting ones because it actually, you have then the personalities of these people that are about to examine the Shroud, this relic, and they've spent, just like, really interesting scientists, they've spent a ton of time absolutely planning everything. And then they get there, and then they can't get their X-ray equipment through customs and whatever, and then, here they are, they planned everything, and then they have to, they finally get their equipment and they're setting up, and they've only got a couple of hours to set up, and they're about to start their investigations and stuff like that. And yeah, so I do talk about Stirp. It's a big piece. I talk about the 1988 radiocarbon dating and what happened there, and then so those are kind of the modern day things. And then of course Mario Trematore with the fire incident. I've got that whole thing, and how he then, you see him rushing out of the chapel with the thing on his shoulder, that coffin on his shoulder. And so yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, cool. Well, one thing we've been kind of talking a lot about what you've managed to fit in the book, and I'm impressed. You've managed to fit in quite a bit, 2000 years of history, literally. So I'm just wondering, is there anything that you've kind of left out or weren't able to include that you really wish you could have put in there, or maybe would save for volume 2 or something like that?
Well, there is a lot, and as I'm learning more, there's a whole much even more that I would put in it. So my original plan was actually to do have one book, and I didn't think it was going to get this big, but have one book on the Shroud, the Sidarium, the Holy Cross, and the Crown of Thorns, or Cap of Thorns. And now what I have is I had to shrink it down, because even the Shroud book just got to be too long. Even 13 stories is too many. And so it's a little bit longer than a typical novel might be. And so then I had to cut out all of this stuff on the Sidarium. So I have the Sidarium book mostly written. I've got to work through a handful of things yet. So I've got a book on the Sidarium and how it then travels through through the Mediterranean over to Spain. So for those people that may not know, the Sidarium is the face cloth that was put on Jesus as he was taken down from the cross. And it's one of the other linens tossed to the side in the tomb. So you have the Shroud linen, and then you have the face cloth, or believed to be the face cloth, that was tossed to the side, rolled up to the side in the tomb. And then it has a whole path as well. And so I've got, like I said, a bunch of that written that I would have liked to have had in the original story. And then of course now, there's I'm hopefully the next thing after that'll be the Crown of Thorns. And then, all of a sudden there's a new chapter, because then they had to take it out of the Notre Dame when the fire took place, and they had to rescue it, and then it's going to come back. So I'm going to have a whole new chapter just on that when I get to that one. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
That's
All right.
exciting. You've been busy.
Yeah, way too busy.
Very busy.
one thing I'd like to ask, just kind of wholly apart from your book for a second, and just what is your take on some of the main Shroud topics? So, for example, I think you hinted through your book that you would take the Ian Wilson route, the Image of a Death story. But what's your take on things like the carbon dating, and how you think the images might have been formed and stuff?
Well, I think one of the things too is, as I've talked to a lot of different folks in researching the book and generally, is first of all, the carbon dating results were incredibly political. Pride was in the middle of that, no question about it. Those three labs, they wanted to prove that, more so than to prove that the Shroud was true, they wanted to prove that it was false, because that would then elevate their stature. And but the thing that I think I came to the conclusion was that their results, their measurements were actually correct, but how they interpret them and how they relate to the age of the Shroud is incorrect. So they made the right measurements. They got the right amount of carbon in there, the carbon-14, and all of that stuff was right. I think they didn't do anything wrong there, but then they got them. And then how do you interpret those given how that image was created? And there's a couple of different theories, and these aren't in my book, but you have then, the proton or the neutron absorption theory, or you have some other theories as to why those particular samples were potentially incorrect. Was it the neutron absorption theory, or was it some kind of an invisible reweave? And which means that carbon-14 dating needs to lead to further investigation. And it'll either prove either the reweave theory, or it'll prove the neutron absorption theory, or maybe some other thing will come out of it. And I think the other thing that unfortunately took place as well is and I don't know if you'd call them the atheist press, but here they kind of they took one they took one piece of data against maybe 20 or 30 pieces of data. They took one and said, well, this negates all those other 20. Yeah. They didn't say these 20 negate that one. Why is one held to a higher standard than the others? So, so that was.
Especially given that Beta Analytics, the largest radiocarbon dating company in the world out in Florida, they talk about on their own website, people can Google it, look under textiles, and it says that if you're going to radiocarbon date textiles, it needs to be part of a multidisciplinary process, which there's only one way you can interpret that, and that's saying because radiocarbon dating textiles is not overly reliable on its own, and so you need to see corroborating evidence, and especially if there's other evidence that goes against what the radiocarbon date is, that it might not be right. And the fact that we know that there have been things that have radiocarbon dated to a future date tells you that it's not a perfect system. I mean, it's not people think it is the gold standard in terms of dating, but that still doesn't mean it's perfect, and there are many examples of it not being, especially when you're dealing with textiles, as the company itself says. I mean, you just can't get away from.
And you have then the politics of the politics of the church, you have the politics of the Shroud, and you have the politics related to carbon dating, where they know they're going to make money almost regardless of what answer they come up with.
And also in the Beta Analytics website, it also talks about to not even smoke near a sample that's going to be carbon dated. Well, the Shroud's been in 2 fires, and then it talks about how water damage can skew. So I mean, and that's
Teddy's going to hate me, but I have to be honest with the audience. So Hugh Ferry has responded to this. He actually spoke directly to Beta Analytics, and they have given a different explanation. I agree with Teddy that the labs themselves said, we need a multidisciplinary process, but that's for any type of material. they just
For
put.
textile, no, it was specifically under textile evidence.
Okay. Well, I don't want to debate, but I'm just trying, in the sake of being honest, Beta Labs responded directly to Hugh, and they explained that it's not what you were saying, that it's not just for textiles. They just said that for some kind of marketing purpose. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to see what their response says as opposed to what Hugh says their response is.
Fair enough.
So anyway, not that the radiocarbon dating was
I know what's
controversial
on-
at all.
I know what's on their website, and
Which,
that's pretty big. And I saw that
Yeah.
about 2 years ago.
so Guy,
and-
what's your take on the image formation then? Because we haven't even talked about that. Do you have a theory?
Yeah. Well, the thing about science is that it really doesn't prove a positive. It usually proves a negative. It's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. And so it's not, painted, it's not dyed, it's not scorched, it's not whatever, right? And so they've ruled out all of the things that, you would think that might have made that. So that leaves then this mysterious process. And, there does seem to be, with this the neutron absorption theory, and maybe then there's kind of like a laser theory that's going on with using lasers, excimer lasers, to somehow do something, and I don't have the details on that, but there's no question that there was some kind of an energy there that formed that image. And I think what's going to happen is I think scientists will figure out what caused the image at some point, but they will not be able to reproduce the mechanism that caused the image. So they'll be able to and maybe it's not even figuring out, they'll be able to simulate how an image like that could have been formed, but that simulation doesn't mean it's the only way that it could have gotten there. There could have been something else.
You really think that one day that they're going to manage to meet all of the special criteria of the shroud?
Yeah, I do, but that doesn't. But that does not mean that they have figured out what caused the image. Okay, so they will. I think
I'm
the
doubtful that it's gonna. I mean, anything's possible.
Well, and that maybe is also my answer. Well, anything is possible. So they will have figured out. Well, let me maybe restate it. They will have been able to reproduce an image using some kind of a technique. It doesn't necessarily mean that technique is what caused the image. Okay, so they'll be able to make it an image that has 3D components to it. They'll be able to make an image that only hits that tiny little layer on the top of the threads. But that doesn't mean that that's the method that it was actually caused. I think we will just be able to reproduce it.
But on a philosophical level, and and this is just me thinking here, I don't have evidence for it, but it just seems to me that when we think of something as being a miracle, it's got to inspire awe. And I think that, and when we look at what the motivations would have been for God to create the shroud, I think it's, so that we see that this is a miracle that can't be replicated. Now, did he mean for it never to be replicated, or just not, for a good chunk of time? But to me, it sort of cheapens a miracle if man can replicate it, even if it's not necessarily I think that God is going to have his miracle have components to it that just will never be able to do. I mean, no, I may be proven wrong, so that, like I said, anything is possible, but I just have this strong suspicion that it won't happen just because God's, going to have it be said. But I could be wrong.
All right, cool. Yeah, Guy, if you want, what are your thoughts on that? Do miracles have to be unique, like a one-time?
Interesting question. I guess you'd have to go back to what is the definition of a miracle, whether it's unique or not. I would consider the holy fire that's reproduced every Easter in the tomb, in the Holy Sepulchre. That seems to be a miracle, and yet it's repeated every day. So I guess you could actually have repeatable miracles. True. Certainly, this is a miracle. The shroud and the resurrection are certainly, well, the resurrection is a miracle, and whether it could be reproduced, it may have already been reproduced. Elijah, God took him, so to speak. You have the transfiguration, you have the angel sitting at the tomb. So you do have some miracles that are also there as well.
I think you're kind of breaking up a bit. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, just hang on one second. So Guy, yep. I think at this point you've kind of already answered the last question on my list. You've given us kind of a hint as to the next books that you have, right? The Sudarium and the Crown of Thorns and that sort of thing. So before I end it off, number one, I'll turn it to you and just say, like, is there anything else that I've missed and I haven't asked you about that you think is really important that you want the audience to know about? Or
yeah, no, I think I appreciate that, and I think we've been able to cover a lot of stuff that's in the book. The Only Witness, a history of the Shroud of Turin. There was it, as you may know, it's very hard to name your own baby, and it's very hard to name your own book and give it a title. I think the Only Witness is the Shroud is the only witness to the resurrection. And then instead of saying the history of the Shroud, I have it as a history, because it could be that there's some other history, and I'm almost, there has to be. I mean, there's no way that what I've written is correct. It is a possible history of the Shroud of Turin, and so there's that piece of it, and then I hope if you go to my website, guypowell.com, if you don't mind a little plug, there is an excerpt, the first 10 pages. And I hope you'll download that, read it, and give me some comments. Would love to get your comments, and then stay tuned for a notice on the actual launch, which is a handful of weeks away. So we're very excited about that.
My goodness. Yeah, I just remembered. So I got to ask you, you have your own podcast, and I was on it, right? The backstory, the Shroud of Turin. So before I turn it to Teddy for a final question, I think she's frozen, but plug your podcast. Tell
thank you. Yeah, I didn't want to take, but it's funny. So Dale and I, we've got podcasts, and I think they both add to the whole knowledge base of the Shroud of Turin and the discussion around it. And I think so my podcast is the backstory of the Shroud of Turin, and you can find it on Apple and Spotify, and then also on YouTube as the videos for that. And the idea for that is to kind of be a repository of Shroud experts to really get their personal takes on what they've done and what their opinions are, and then where they see the future going with the Shroud of Turin, and that's the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And thank you for allowing me to mention that. And and I mentioned Dale's. I've had Dale on mine, and I'm so glad to be here today as well, and with you and Teddy, and talk about the Shroud, which is near and dear to all of our hearts.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you can plug anytime. We're a team. I don't care about copyrights or anything like that. We are sharing knowledge. So we are a team, and Guy Powell, it's amazing, the experts that he gets. So definitely check out that. I think Teddy, okay, she's saying she has technical difficulties. Well, Teddy, if you can hear us, if you have one last question for Guy, just type it in the chat and I'll ask it for you. Just because your video is very... Yeah,
we're sorry to see that that we're kind of having that, but if it wasn't technology, it'd be something else we'd complain about. So
Exactly.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and it sounds like Teddy's typing in something there. And and what you've done in terms of your Shroud Wars podcast as well, I found to be very enlightening, as you've had some really interesting discussions, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have as far as I know, actual debates or discussions.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody else does that. So I think
Yep.
that provides something, something
Very unique, very unique. And I think, one of the things too is even about the shroud is, in a friendly way, but is to get two sides to the equation so that you can get, that extra little proof, that extra little effort to be able to say, this is how we, think we got here. And it's kind of like I always talk about the adversarial system in law. It's kind of like the adversarial system in science, is that you come up with a theory, somebody's going to poke some holes in it, you fix the holes, and then they find some more, or you come up with something, and that's how we all together drive the knowledge base surrounding the shroud.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I can hear Teddy laughing. I don't see anything in the chat, but Teddy, try and ask just a quick question. Just ask the question to Guy.
I can't, because there were technical difficulties on my end where y'all were breaking up and I couldn't even make out what y'all were saying. Was there something juicy that I was going to ask a question about?
It was very juicy, yeah, Teddy. No, but if you have one last question, it looks like your technical difficulties are over. So.
I didn't have a question.
Teddy doesn't
All
have
right.
a question. Okay, cool. That
Well,
is
that's because I missed out the whole conversation.
no problem. All right, cool. I just want to say thank you so much to both Guy and Teddy for coming on and sharing Guy's excellent knowledge. I think it's a great book. I think it's great, his strategy. It's something unique. It's something that, like I said, it never even occurred to me that writing a fiction could be helpful for shroud research. So that's great. And obviously, thank you to Teddy for always being willing to help me out as a co-host when,
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you both. Absolutely. Very good to
Great
talk with both
talking
of you.
with y'all. And I'm just so excited about your book. And I think people, it's going to add a certain type of reality of it all with painting a picture. And just where people kind of get to kind of go through the history through your book. So I think that's really special. Good for you.
Awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, thank you guys so much. Hopefully the audience got something out of this and we'll check out Guy's book. But other than that, the next show I have coming up, we're going to be looking on the Faith Unaltered podcast and assessing Tyler Vela, the infamous deconvert who kind of deconverted as a famous Christian apologist. So we're actually going to be evaluating him. And even from what I'm told, we're going to be inviting him himself on the show to speak about that. So that's what you can look forward to next time. Other than that, have a great week.